Not a lot of reflective surfaces down on the sewer, huh?
Still, could be worse. My nose could be gushing blood.
Your nose could be...
What do you mean by
Everyone, back to work. Let's make a mayor.
It's the Popcorn Digest with Gareth and Andy. Hello and welcome to Popcorn Digest, the podcast about the films you love and some you don't. I'm your host, Gareth Green, and joining me as always is my full-time co-host and part-time caped crusader, Andrew Raphael.
Jingle bells, Batman smells, Robin flew away.
I thought it was Robin laid an egg.
Well,
the Batmobile lost its wheel and the Joker got away. Hey!
I think there's many variants. What mine had M6 motorway in it as well, so...
Oh, right. Oh,
yeah.
Fair enough.
Because Jess said, Robin laid an egg, and I was like, I've never heard of that one. Not where I was from.
Really?
It was always Robin flew away, which makes more sense.
Your way is the wrong way.
So, why is Robin laid an egg? I don't get it.
He's a bird. He's a robin.
Anyway.
And today we're looking at the brief rise and fall of a grotesque political leader whose archaic and repugnant view on society and women nearly caused the destruction of his populace. Also, he has weird hands and hair. But that's enough about Donald Trump. Christ, I hope that's the last time I ever have to say that, as we're watching Batman Returns. But first, roll the trailer.
I've been down here too long. It's time for me to ascend.
From the sewers of Gotham, a new villain emerges.
You didn't invite me, so I crashed.
From the rooftops of Gotham, the perfect enemy comes to life.
I am Catwoman. Hear me roar. Meow.
And the only one who can save this city is a creature of the night.
Hey, stud. I thought we had something together.
From the creative mind that brought us Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Planet of the Apes, comes Batman Returns, a packed-to-the-wall sequel to the 1989 Caped Crusader classic. Michael Keaton is back as Sir Not Appearing in this movie, while Danny DeVito, Christopher Walken, Michelle Pfeiffer, and a kitchen sink are brought in for villain duties. So, Andy, Batman Returns are the first of our Christmas specials.
Yep.
I've got to say, this is the one that I nominated really for our Christmas episode. And it's one that I really wanted to talk about. I watched it recently. These are the Batman films that we grew up with.
Yeah.
As being kids in the 90s, these were the Batman films that everybody on the school ground were talking about.
Yeah.
I wanted to get back to them. I wanted to go back to this Tim Burton beginning of the series. Well, it's not really the beginning of the series, but this is where the view of Batman in today's modern culture, this is where it started in cinema for pretty much all of us, really.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get to this, and I will say, Andy, do you have like a similar background with this series? Is this one that you grew up with as well?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Although I would say this film is probably the one that I watched the least as a kid.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to say because it scared me. I think it was the one that I found interesting, but for me as a kid, it didn't appeal as much as the others around it. Actually, no, I'm not going to say Batman and Robin because that was a bit later, but I think at the time, my two favourite Batman films as a kid were the original Batman and Batman Forever.
Adam West.
No. No, the 1989 Batman and Batman Forever.
Yeah.
And obviously, as time goes on, my opinion changes drastically around Batman Forever. But yeah, this one was the one in the middle, and I do recall it. I recall the poster, which is a very distinctive poster, especially for a photographic poster. and I just remember it being on the billboards at the cinemas.
Just to confirm, are we talking about the three-head
the three-head one.
Because that is one that is like seared in my memory. I remember it being around.
Yeah, I'd say for a photographic poster, which have generally always been recognised as being inferior to, graphics and things.
Yeah.
That is a particularly effective one and has sort of become iconic, I think.
I think so, yeah. I mean, I agree with you, actually, in regards to going back to the time that these films came out, many, many moons ago.
Yeah.
I think, actually, Batman Forever was the first film that I saw at the cinema with regards to this particular series. I think it's the only of these four films. It's the only one that I actually saw at the cinema, come to think about it. And I loved Batman Forever when it first came out. I make no bones about it. My opinion may have changed in the years since, but when that first came out, American Express Batman card and everything, I loved it.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think when we go into the production of this film and the aftermath of the film and what Batman Forever represents, I think the effect of that third film did what the studio wanted in the end, which this film couldn't deliver.
Yes.
It didn't really have much intention of delivering on that, which is why, as kids, we are much more inclined to like a film like Batman Forever, even though now when you look at it, it's, it's not a particularly great film or anything.
No. I honestly do think, though, these things are cyclical. They always come round. And I have noticed a growing cult fan base for Batman Forever start to resurface again. It started high. I remember it was fondly regarded by kids of our age during the 90s. And
it was everywhere.
And then it dropped in terms of stature. And it became derided. But now I've noticed a slight increase again. Like, I've noticed the articles online where it's in defense of Batman Forever. Given that it's a Joel Schumacher film, and obviously he passed. Was it this year or last year?
Oh, God.
I feel like 2020 has lasted for about 16 years.
Yeah, I know.
So, I mean, and given that Joel Schumacher has passed recently, it has caused people to go back and revisit his films, and especially looking at them through that kind of like queer lens that he always provided. And I think that there is some merit to Forever, even if it is just the odd glimpse here and there, whereas there's nothing to Batman and Robin. But yeah, Batman Forever was everywhere.
Yeah, you could not get away from it, like the toys. And I think, in a way, the studio got their wish of having that balance. To be honest, Batman Forever, I think, was the start of superhero franchise getting their target audience right and being in harmony with all the merchandise.
Yeah.
Because I think prior to that, with the earlier Tim Burton Batman's films, there was always a great unease between the franchise side of it and the artistic side of it.
Yeah.
Which we'll go into in a bit whilst we talk about this film.
Tim Burton making a film for Happy Meal toys doesn't feel like it works in my mind.
No.
So I think that's what Joel Schumacher brought to the table when, in regards to what the studio wanted. It was like it's suddenly something that could be packaged up much easier.
Yeah, I mean, especially Tim Burton of this time, which I would definitely say
this is the best Tim Burton.
It's concentrated Burton rather than diluted Burton.
I honestly think that there are two distinct Tim Burtons. There's the Tim Burton of now and the Tim Burton of then, and the Tim Burton of then was a force to be reckoned with, in my opinion. It's weird that I think now he does make some very safe studio pictures that I don't understand what it is that appeals to him, other than perhaps, it's a bit of a safety net. I guess the main one I don't get is Dumbo. I don't get Dumbo. No. I don't get Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
I mean, to be honest, I think even his more Tim Burton-y films like Dark Shadows and things like that, it feels like a pale imitation. It still feels like someone's tried to make a film in that vein. I don't know, there's something that's missing.
A spark.
Yeah, and I feel like, I mean, he's had his moments, but I mean, ever since sort of like...
I think Mars Attacks.
Yeah, I think the failure of Mars Attacks, because even like films like Sleepy Hollow and Big Fish, there's still something missing there.
I really like Sleepy Hollow. I think that's a really good film. And I like Big Fish. There's nothing Tim Burton about it, but I feel like it's been an exercise of Tim Burton making a film that doesn't have any of his eccentricities, essentially, and he's tried to make something completely different. But I do agree that as a result, it does feel a little bit like neutered Burton.
Yeah, and when you start getting into like Planet of the Apes and Charlie and
Yeah.
the Chocolate Factory and even Sweeney Todd, I'm just like, to be honest, for me, they have far too much Helena Bonham Carter, and I'm not a Helena Bonham Carter fan. She fits in like Tim Burton's world, but it's so obvious. I don't know. There's something about it I don't like.
It breaks the immersion, to be
Yeah.
honest. It's like, to be honest, I have the same issue with Johnny Depp in these films as well, which is this is the Johnny Depp role, and that's the Helena Bonham Carter role.
Yeah.
And you know what? Like if you say that it's a Tim Burton film with a Johnny Depp role and a Helena Bonham Carter role, you know already what characters those people are playing. That's all you need.
Yeah.
You don't need to know what the film's about. You don't need to know the title. You just need to know who's involved, and you already know who the characters are. And it's like, it's become pigeonholed in that way that I think everybody just got sick and tired of seeing those actors playing those type of characters in this type of film by Tim Burton.
In a way, like boiling it down to it, Tim Burton just became more of the same.
Yes.
Whereas the Tim Burton that we're going to discuss here was incredibly dynamic, bouncing from film to film.
Yes.
If you think of that run that he had from Pee-wee's Big Adventure all the way up until, I would say, Ed Wood.
Yeah.
That's a great bunch of films. There's not a dud among them.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I mean, I know I just mentioned it before, but this is always one that I hold firmly to my heart, and one that I'm sure we will discuss on the podcast in the years to come. But Mars Attacks for me as well. I really have a fondness for Mars Attacks.
Yeah.
That's one that I would like to go back to on the show.
Yeah, I love like Edward Scissorhands, and I mean Ed Wood as well is
Edward's perfect. Edward is just pure perfection.
and it's definitely the best Johnny Depp performance in Tim Burton films. I mean, he's good in Edward Scissorhands, but he's even better in Ed Wood.
I do think Johnny Depp's career does have some rather solid performances, but I do think Ed Wood is perhaps his best performance, not just in Tim Burton as a filmography, but also just in Johnny Depp's as well.
Yeah.
I think that is one of his greatest performances.
Yeah.
But yes, moving back to Batman Returns. Let's before we discuss ourselves out of the film.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the context. Let's bring ourselves all the way back to when Batman Returns was made. And really, to begin that story, I guess we have to begin with 1989's Batman, the first of this series. Mm-hmm. The Jack Nicholson starring. I mean, that's what everybody knows these films for. This is something that's always leveled at these films that, oh, well, they're not really about Batman. They're more about the villains. I don't know why I put on that voice, but that's a critique that's always leveled at these films. But speaking about Batman specifically for a moment, I think that's the only film in this series that is actually about Batman.
Yeah.
But Jack Nicholson so outshined everybody else in that film as the villain that every single film since became villain focused.
Yeah. Yeah.
Batman is about Batman. It's about the origins of Batman told through the lens of, well, it's him facing his past, his fear, the thing that made him become Batman, and that is the Joker in this version of events. But because Jack Nicholson so chewed up that role and that entire film, everything since was, well, what are we going to do for the villain? How are we going to top that? And that's how I think these films became more increasingly villain-centric as the series went on.
Yeah, and I think it started that way as well, like even down to the billing as well, when you have like Jack Nicholson billed above Michael Keaton in the original film, and then you get to the point where in the last of the initial Batman film series, again, you have Arnold Schwarzenegger being billed above George Clooney as Batman.
It's going to be a cold winter.
Oh, man. I don't know. How do we get from there to there? Oh, damn.
It is a leap and a jump.
It really is. It's like, again, it's like going from GoldenEye to Die Another Day, like we were talking about the other week. It's one of those. It really is. Because, even Batman Forever, you can sort of just about pigeonhole it in being in the same series, but there is a clear split between the two Burton films and the two Schumacher films. They're almost like mini-series within this bigger series. It's strange talking about Batman as a... because the first Batman is the instigator of everything that's come since. But when you look into its making of, it's so heavily tied to the original Superman. Yeah. Because when they were developing Batman throughout the 80s, they involved a lot of the same people that were responsible for that first Superman movie to try and repeat the formula. And obviously over time it became more of its own thing. But, you know, initially you did have people like Tom Mankiewicz come in to, you know, write the screenplay for the original Batman. So there are clear ties. And it's strange when you think about it. There was only 11 years in between Superman the movie and the 1989 Batman.
They feel so remarkably divorced from each other in terms of the style of each film and in terms of what they do with the characters. But yeah, they are intrinsically linked.
Yeah.
You know, it makes me think, like watching the documentary and seeing them go into detail about these type of connections and also thinking about what happened with Tim Burton's Superman. But I remember a time when you would hear about a certain type of film being made for years and it would always be up in air whether or not it would be made, like Superman. That is one that I remember hearing about for years and years and years, the Nicolas Cage one, and that went to other people. These type of development hell ones where they're trying so desperately to get it right. Whereas now, I don't think that happens anymore. Nope. I think studios are just, they'll just throw it out there, and if it works, it works. If not, we'll recast it next year.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I think. I mean, what is this? We've got like, I mean, if you count Lego Batman, in the past like 5 years, we've had 3 different Batmans.
Yeah, I mean, the days of big tentpole superhero films being stuck in development hell, or you know, huge rumblings of who's going to be involved and all that kind of stuff, just gone now because they announced the film before they've even started developing it. Like, they have a title.
The marketing starts then.
I even remember like announcing something like Thor Ragnarok.
Yes.
Now, I'm pretty sure that when they announced that film with the title Thor Ragnarok, there was no script or anything. Like, they just had the title, and that seems to be what happens these days. So they have to like fit everything around that title and the schedule. Yeah. Whereas, doing something like Tim Burton's Superman that's all gone.
And even thinking about like Taika Waititi's involvement in Star Wars, it's like these things get announced so far in advance now. It's like in 3 films' time, this director's going to be making a Star Wars film. So mark this in your calendar for 2028.
Yeah.
You know? So it's like, the marketing now begins from day dot. The moment that somebody walks into a studio conference room and says, you know what, we should make another Alien film. That's the date that they put the announcement out. That's how it feels now.
I mean, it's definitely a much more streamlined business now.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Which is in stark contrast to these earlier Batman films, because you get the sense that there is no ambition for continuity or anything like that. They're dealing with things a film at a time.
In a way, they're kind of living dangerously though within this time with these type of films, because every film lives or dies. The whole franchise lives and dies by the success of a singular film each time. It's not about how the franchise performs as a whole and, oh, well, this film can kind of, you know, it can live off the shoulders of this other film.
Yeah.
You know, like how, for example, the Marvel films carried The Incredible Hulk and other films that underperformed, like Thor 2, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Back then, if Batman Returns had bombed, this series would have just gone into hibernation for some time.
Yeah. I mean, the silver lining of that is that these films are able to stand on their own much better.
I 100% agree. I can see, though, from a studio perspective, why they embrace the newer model of filmmaking rather than the older one.
Yeah.
Because to them, it's a much safer bet. Whereas for the audiences, it just means that we do get more of the same, but it's a more of a consistency.
Yeah.
But yes, going back to Batman Returns again. So Batman comes out. It is a huge success at the time. I mean, 1989 it came out. I was born in 86, but Batman is a film that also I remember being everywhere. I don't remember it coming out, but I remember the years since. I remember Batman Returns coming out, but I remember everybody speaking about the Joker on the playground and that kind of thing. So, yeah, I do have memory of this phenomenon. But Warner Brothers did want, I mean, in normal studio fashion, they wanted to begin work on a sequel straight away.
Yeah.
So much so that they actually stored the sets for the first film to a cost of $250,000.
At Pinewood Studios.
Yes, but unfortunately there was something of a wrench in the cogs, and that was that Tim Burton didn't want to return. He didn't want to make a Batman film. He felt that he didn't want to do a franchise film at this point in his career. He'd already done that with Batman, and he said in a 1989 interview that it had to be something special with the characters in order to entice him back. It had to be doing something new. So Warner Brothers, they went ahead, they brought in Sam Hamm, who was brought in to write a few drafts of the script to see if they could come up with an angle that could entice Burton back to the director's chair. And from the Wikipedia article, it does have some details as to what Hamm's scripts is. I've not actually read this. I've read a few Batman scripts, a few Batman unproduced scripts, but not this one. And this one did have Catwoman and Penguin in it, and they were looking for hidden treasure.
Why?
Which I don't get. Is this like Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Batman?
Oh, that does sound like an episode of the 60s Batman, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Flint's Treasure or something.
It really does.
I can just imagine them being in some sort of submarine like they are in the movie.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it feels like the original version of the screenplay had much more continuity with the original film, and stylistically had many more callbacks or just through-line characters. You know, most notably Vicky Vale and Harvey Dent.
Oh, so did Vicky Vale actually, was she included within this draft as well?
Apparently,
as a returning character?
One of the original drafts had Bruce Wayne proposing to Vicky Vale at the end of the movie. So it was definitely a proper continuation, leaving where they left off.
Yeah.
Which, ultimately Tim Burton wasn't really interested in.
No, I mean, I like Kim Basinger. I really do. I think she's great, and she's really good in Batman. But one thing I would say is that because Batman Returns so depends where it succeeds on the sexual tension and chemistry between Michael Keaton and Michelle Pfeiffer, between Bruce Wayne and Selena Kyle, that it was a wise decision to probably leave her out of the script entirely.
I imagine if she had been in there, she would have been fridged anyway, because with that particular character, the way that they framed her in the original movie, I can't see them really being able to do much with her character unless they transformed her in some way.
Yes. Where could you take her character in terms of her relationship with Batman? It felt like it already reached its natural close.
Yeah.
So, meanwhile, I will say, going back to the making of the film, Tim Burton, he said he was impressed with the work of Daniel Waters on Heathers. I watched that film recently, actually, again. I just picked up the Arrow video version of the film, and it's still just brilliantly sharp and witty. I love it. He brought Daniel Waters on board to write a Beetlejuice sequel, which I feel like he's probably one of about 24 different writers that have taken a crack at a Beetlejuice sequel over the last 30 years.
No, that is a film in development hell.
Yes, constantly. Yeah. I wonder, it will eventually take some form because it is still a brand with a name. So it's going to happen at some point, and I wonder what form it's going to
belated.
Take. It really is.
It will be like Beetlejuice, the care home years.
Yeah, they won't need any shrunken heads anymore. That's just naturally how Michael Keaton will look by that point.
He won't need any makeup. They'll have to dig him up or something.
So instead, Warner Brothers gave Burton a large amount of creative control in order to bring him back. And this was in a move that saw Tim Burton move up to a producer credit, but also saw the infamous John Peters and Peter Gruber relegated to exec producer credit. And although nothing really goes into detail as to the friction between, like the question mark as to whether or not Tim Burton would return, this particular sentence makes me think that was the sticking point for Tim Burton.
Yeah.
Like, this is it. It's like, if I come back to this film, I don't want to deal with these people.
Yeah, I'm sure a giant mechanical spider was proposed at some point.
Oh, definitely. 100%. So it saw those infamous characters reduced to an exec producer credit. And obviously, Burton read the Sam Hamm draft and didn't like what he had read and brought on Daniel Waters for rewrites. And later in production, Wesley Strick was enlisted for uncredited rewrites, and they cited that the part that needed most work was the lack of a master plan for the Penguin, which proved to be an issue. And so he brought on board this idea that the Penguin would kill all the firstborn sons of Gotham, which, to be honest, as far as master plans go, it's like introduced in like the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, it does feel very much tacked on, although you do get a sense that Strick was playing on Daniel Waters' draft of the Moses parallel, which was more played out in the beginning of the film with the baby in the basket, and also looking at over the city and saying "burn, baby, burn." And there's lots of other references here and there, even like the 33 years later. thing
of
is,
course. Yes,
is to do with that. So he was almost like bringing it to its kind of natural conclusion, but again, the development of this screenplay was fraught with difficulties, and it shows.
Yes, there's so much that I like and even love about this film, but I think it's this on the screenplay where it just kind of falls apart and falters. It just stops at attaining the greatness that it's so clearly on the cusp of.
Yeah.
And I think this is a real issue for me, is the fact that it does set up the character of Penguin marvelously as being the central villain of the piece, but even he gets lost in the movie.
Yeah.
At a certain point in, and it starts off as being like making the statement of this is the Penguin story, and it ends with that statement as well, but in between it loses that completely. And I know that has this political rise and fall, but that even feels like it's playing in the background at times, and I don't know what is. I mean, I know that Penguin says, I know that Cobblepot says that he has these grand plans for global cooling, as he says, for the future. But what is his plan in his rise to power? What's the point? What's the end game? And although they introduce this idea of, well, he's going to kill all the firstborn sons of Gotham, that feels like it's so tacked on in the end. I get it's Moses parallel. I get that completely, and I see how that works. But because it feels so tacked on at the end, it doesn't feel like that was ever really part of his master plan. That just feels like it's a bit of vengeance.
Yeah, I feel like it's the biggest flaw of the film, that you don't really get a sense, given how they've set him up, of where the Penguin wants to go, what's driving him, what does he really want to do? Because when you get down to the brass tacks, the prime mover, especially in the first half of the film, is the character of Max Schreck. He is the one that's instigating many of the events that occur in the film. And without him, there would be no story. So
100%,
he's really a linchpin. I think we need to go into like the main problem regarding these rewrites, and also that the idea that Tim Burton wanted to do something new, it did have a knock-on effect as to where they were in the screenplay, because that character of Max Schreck was originally meant to be Harvey Dent. And when you look at that, the kind of plot that they have in the film, the idea of that character wanting the Penguin to become the mayor makes way more sense when you frame it as it being Harvey Dent as the district attorney rather than Max Schreck, a corrupt businessman.
Yeah.
That whole part of it doesn't really work because it just doesn't fit that character.
Yeah, I think you can still see Harvey Dent's outline for that role, most certainly, yeah. I think this is Christopher Walken in purely Bond villain mode as well. Like
this is Christopher Walken in full-on Walken mode.
It really is.
His Walken factor is on 11. That's the strange thing. I absolutely love him in this film. He's just chewing scenery left, right, and center. And I love the look that they've gone for him. It's like properly Tim Burton comic book villain. Like,
it really is, yeah.
You know, it's his contribution to that lore, because obviously he was invented for this film. Considering how much screen time he has, it's like you just have to question why he's in this film in a way, because it's like he doesn't really need to be there, but they give a lot of attention to him. But he does get lost again in the second half of the film. It's just a very undisciplined, I'm going to say story in inverted commas, because I think this is something that I've ever since the very first time I saw this film, which would have been a long, long time ago, I always thought there was something slightly wrong with the film. And then every time I've watched the film, subsequently, I've come more to the realization that there is no plot in this film.
Yeah.
Of any substance, anyway. There's no central story.
Yes.
It's more of a character...
A collection of moments.
Yeah, it's a collection of moments, and it's more of a character study. You can tell that Burton is heavily invested in his villains, but even that gets lost because there's just too much of everything.
There's too much vying for space. Yeah, and the thing is, it's not that I want to, like, if I was involved in this film, overseeing it, and if somebody asked me, what would you change? And it's like, to be honest, I would be scratching my head and saying, well, I don't want to take any characters out of the film because I love what these actors are doing. I love the look of these characters. I love the chemistry. Everybody's doing great work. It looks great as well. It's more so, it's like everything just needs a story. My issue with this film is that if you look at it from a macro sense, it doesn't really work, and it's like in the large whole of it. But if you go from a moment to moment, scene to scene basis, I'm like, oh, this scene's great, and that scene's great, and this scene's great. But it doesn't quite stitch up together.
Yeah, it's more on how these characters are connected to one another. It's more how they're connected on a character level to one another.
Yeah.
That is the real issue. And you can tell that they've tried to force things through as well. Like,
yes,
one of my biggies is the relationship between Catwoman and the Penguin, and also Catwoman's beef towards Batman, because it just comes out of nowhere and there's no real justification for it. Even before, I mean, you can kind of get the fact that she's a bit pissed for Batman taking one of her 9 lives, but even before then, they just start fighting all of a sudden for no reason. And it's like they've really tried to just force that antagonism without having it develop organically. And I find that a big issue because, again, Michelle Pfeiffer's portrayal of that character is great. You completely buy her as Selina Kyle.
Yes.
You know, I even like the way that she's involved with Max Schreck. That whole part of it works.
Yes, it does, yeah.
I mean, to be honest, really, Max Schreck should have just been used for that purpose alone, and it should have just been the story of her and Max Schreck. And Max Schreck shouldn't have got involved with all the Penguin malarkey. It should have been a different thing. But yeah, her beef with Batman. I mean, the Bruce Wayne stuff works fine, but her specific beef with Batman doesn't really work for me. It doesn't feel justified enough.
Yes, I mean, I do agree. I think what they're going for with that character is just that because of naturally what's happened to her and because of her status in this world, after becoming from Selina Kyle to Catwoman, she sees men of power as being an enemy. And I get that, but I think the specific beef with Batman himself doesn't make sense because, as you mentioned, he takes one of her 9 lives, but it's their antagonistic relationship is rooted before then. And I think even just a minor tweak to solve that would be really to make them, and I know that this is a thing that's normally used for like Batman versus Superman or that type thing, but make it more of a clashing of ideologies.
Yeah.
I think the issue is because this Batman is one that, for example, kills people rather cold-bloodedly. Like, there is a man that's just stood in front of a newspaper stand blowing fire, like a circus performer, that he engulfs in flames. That guy did nothing.
Nope.
Batman does kill people rather mercilessly. And if he had been the Batman that embraces the code of ethics kind of thing, they could have done what they did, with the Dark Knight, essentially, of it's more so not that they're on the wrong side, but more so that they have a clashing of ideologies and how to deal with the bad people in their lives.
Yeah.
And that could have set them off against each other.
Yeah, they really should have made it a clash of perspective on vigilantism.
Yeah.
Catwoman should have been the more like homicidal one, and Batman should have been the cleaner figure in that regard.
Yeah.
Again, that gets lost because Batman's so dark in this film.
He really is.
I'd forgotten how dark it was actually as well. I was like, shit, he kills loads of people in this film.
I kind of like it though, because especially now it sets it apart from the rest of it, just because of, and it fits Burton's worldview. But oh my god, is he dark?
Yeah,
he is so cold-blooded.
It's funny as well, like that. People. I mean, not that I want to defend Batman versus Superman, but when people were talking about how dark Batman was in that film, and I was like, they've completely forgotten about Michael Keaton playing him like this in Batman Returns.
Yes.
But yeah, you can tell that there's some great ideas, and both those individually are great, but they don't mix together very well.
To be honest, that is the same issue that I have with Batman vs Superman as well, is because in terms of the ideologies they present, Batman and Superman are two superheroes that kill motherfuckers.
Yeah.
So what's the point? Like, why are they angry with each other? It doesn't matter. It's supposed to come down to the methodology kind of thing, like, how each one does their thing. But they both kill motherfuckers, so what difference does it make?
Yeah. If they'd planned correctly, they would have probably made Superman a much more cleaner figure.
Exactly, yeah.
And then have Batman be the sort of dark, homicidal sort of maniac. And then it would have been much better. I mean, it would have been much better if Zack Snyder hadn't made the film. In a way, they're trying to make a cinematic universe, but in the same way that they make these earlier Batman films. In a way, it's like they're kind of there's a mix between the two where they're living dangerously, and it doesn't pay off then.
Yeah.
So this film is it's an incredibly frustrating watch because I would not call this film a dud. Like I mentioned before, that run of films that's Tim Burton made from Pee-wee all the way until Ed Wood, there's no duds there.
No.
But this is probably his most flawed, definitely like some sort of flawed masterwork, really. It's the best way of describing it.
Honestly, that's how I would describe it, because I like it and I love all of the elements at work here. I really do. And I am frustrated by the film just as much as you are, because there's so much of it that clearly works beautifully.
Yeah.
There's just some fundamental flaws that just prevent it from reaching that masterwork status.
And we definitely need to go into the fact that this is most definitely Tim Burton's Batman, because from a design standpoint, this is just Tim Burton unadulterated. This period of Tim Burton is when he really spreads his wings, because you have Edward Scissorhands, Batman Returns, and even though he didn't direct it, A Nightmare Before Christmas, are almost like that is Tim Burton
distilled
at his purest in terms of his drawing style and everything and his design aesthetics. Those three films especially are like the most Tim Burton-y films.
No, yeah, definitely.
Especially when you start getting into sort of the design aesthetic and the cinematic inspirations behind a lot of things.
Just before we do get to that point, because I certainly do have some opinions on the look of the film as well, the audio and visual experience that is Batman Returns. But I just want to mention a couple of key points as well, just in regards to the making of the film that kind of influenced some of the decisions that were made as well. We've already talked about the fact that this is a film that it's an embarrassment of riches. It's bursting at the seams in terms of the characters, but as a result, they're all vying for space.
Yeah.
We've mentioned that Harvey Dent was dropped from the film, but another character that was actually dropped from the film was Robin. And Marlon Wayans was cast, signed on, and had already been to a wardrobe fitting for the role. And Robin was supposed to be a mechanic. I don't think he was supposed to wear the Robin suit, but he had a mechanic suit that had an R on it.
Okay.
In that way, I think it was going to be the film in which, by the end of it, they teased that he became Robin or something like that. But at one point, he was going to drive the Batmobile. But yes, it actually came from Warner Brothers themselves to drop this character. Not Tim Burton, not anybody else in the film, but from Warner Brothers themselves to drop that character because there was too much going on.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a decision to make from Warner Brothers, considering that, I mean, I would expect that they would be like, yeah, put Robin in. It means more Happy Meal toys. It means more merchandise. It means more of an angle for us to be able to market this film to kids. And they've gone, actually, we've got too much going on.
Yeah.
Can you please pull it back?
I mean, I would be very surprised if we ever see another cinematic Robin in a Batman film. I would be incredibly surprised. And if he did appear, it would be much more like how they did it with the Nolan films, where it's more sort of very subtly hinted at rather than anything overtly Batman's sidekick Robin. Because that character anyway, I feel like even the comic book writers struggle with that character. He's very much a relic of a much earlier time. And,
definitely.
The idea of Batman being a lone figure is much more appealing and easier to work with than having this sort of breezy side character of Robin. And also, like, considering what they did with him in Batman Forever and obviously Batman and Robin.
Yeah.
I would be very surprised if they ever had another cinematic portrayal of that character.
I mean, even in, considering that Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman was supposed to be the beginning of the glorious DC cinematic universe.
He's killed off before the film
He's killed off before it even begins, says everything about the studio standing on Robin as a character. I can't see him having any place whatsoever, especially considering that they've gone with a much younger Batman for the new one.
Yeah, I can't see him having a place in the Matt Reeves films or film. I don't know.
Yeah.
What's going to happen with that one? Jesus, that film is unintentionally a troubled production.
Yes, yeah. I don't think it's to do with any of the creative factors involved
things.
Whatsoever.
Everything's external.
Yeah.
Bless him.
I do feel bad. This is just an aside, but one of my friends was cast in the film and got dropped because of COVID.
Oh.
And he's a massive Batman fan.
Oh.
But yeah, and I mean, this wasn't the only issue as well that they had with regards to actors dropping from the film as well. I think one of the main ones that we need to go into as well is Annette Bening's. inclusion as Catwoman, because we've talked about Michelle Pfeiffer and how amazing that she is in this film, but she was not the first choice and was actually a last-minute replacement for Catwoman. I mean, do you want to go into a little detail about what happened there?
Yeah, so they cast Annette Bening, who I think was most famous at the time for doing... was it Grifters, amongst other things?
Yeah, it was like the beginning of her career.
And obviously, she was with Warren Beatty at the time, which, Warren Beatty's a strange old figure, isn't he? He's kind of like ubiquitous, but like, oh God, I can go on about Warren Beatty for ages. But
I think that's the first time anybody's ever uttered those words in one sentence. I could go on about Warren Beatty for ages.
He's just a really strange figure in Hollywood.
Odd.
He's a bit of an enigma, isn't he?
He is, and I read Easy Rider, Raging Bull, a fantastic book, and there's a whole section about Warren Beatty and Bonnie and Clyde and those characters, and like he pushed for the idea that it was a character that could not get it up, and that's why he killed people, at odds with the idea of like what people portrayed back then. These kind of macho characters, these, masculine leading roles, and he's like pushing for this. Well, I want to play this character that can't get an erection, and that's why he kills people. That's like, he is an oddball. I think that's the charm of Warren Beatty.
The myth of Warren Beatty's become bigger than the films that he made. Outside of a handful of films, like a lot of the other films are either huge duds or have just largely been forgotten.
Yeah.
But going back to Batman Returns, Annette Bening was cast as Catwoman. And then very close to production, I think, Tim Burton gets a call saying Annette Bening was pregnant.
Yeah.
I think Tim Burton describes it on the documentary as a mixture of emotions going, hey, congratulations, that's great. Fuck, what do we do?
Yeah.
And then we get this whole weird...
Sean Young thing.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen the Shadow of the Bat documentary before last night when I watched it in preparation for this episode. And I knew of the story of Sean Young essentially stalking the producers for the film in attempt to have herself cast as Catwoman. But I always thought that, it's one of those stories where I think there's probably some truth to it, but it's been embellished. And actually, it's all true.
I think it tells you everything that they even have Sean Young on the documentary talking about it.
That's what I was actually shocked. She actually comes in to talk about herself, essentially stalking them in a Catwoman outfit, bursting into the office.
I mean, in her defense, I imagine it would have been shot as part of her interview for the Batman film, because I imagine that documentary is in parts, and it probably would have been filmed at the same time. So, I mean, it's not as crazy as you would think about it, because she was originally cast in the original Batman, in the 1989 Batman film, as Vicky Vale, but had to drop out because she broke her collarbone. So this was some sort of follow-up and her trying to get back into the film series. And I think at one point, and us talking about Vicky Vale, her story being over, which is why she's not in this film, there was originally, I don't know in what draft or whether it was just a discussion, there was some talk of her becoming Catwoman, which would have probably made more sense on a narrative point of view if they'd done something with that character.
Yeah.
It's probably easier to leave it be, but there was talk of that.
And we know that this series isn't beholden to the kind of comic book origins. It's willing to do its own thing entirely.
Yeah.
Which I like, to be honest. I find that refreshing.
Yeah. It's strange because even in that story, there's no kind of... doesn't seem to be any end to that story. It's just like, she comes in dressed as Catwoman. Cool. We cast Michelle Pfeiffer.
I think part of the issue is, I think if it was just for Catwoman, then she's got the role. But I think given the aggressiveness with which she pursued that role, it probably made her a not very appealing choice for Selena Kyle specifically because of how meek and downtrodden she is in this world.
Yeah, I think it's also a combination of them wanting to get a name person in there as well, because I think by that time Sean Young's star had faded somewhat due to a lot of ill fortune as well,
like Batman,
not being able to be in the 1989 Batman and other different issues. And I know Brooke Shields was considered for the part at one point, but the studio didn't consider her a bankable enough star at that time. So they did really want to go for a huge bankable star from that era to be in that role, which is why they got Michelle Pfeiffer. The studio more than got their wish as well, because I think she was a much bigger star at that point than Annette Bening anyway.
And I think it shows in terms of the salaries as well that they received, because Annette Bening, I think they said something like Annette Bening was getting 1 million or something like that, and Michelle Pfeiffer got 3 plus a percentage of the overall gross.
Yeah.
Which just goes to show about her rising star at that time as well.
Yeah. And Michael Keaton got 11 million apparently for his 10 minutes of screen time.
Right. I made a reference to this. I know that he appears as Batman, right? But until Bruce Wayne has a moment like where he actually has a full-on conversation, it's like 28 minutes into the film. Honestly, I paused it so I could take note of it. It's like 26 to 28 minutes into the film when Bruce Wayne finally gets his moment where the scene stops and he gets a conversation with Alfred. I think that says everything really about the film.
Tim Burton tries to justify it in the documentary as well, saying that he does recognize that Batman and Bruce Wayne are not in the film an awful lot, but he kind of saw it as being appropriate for the character. Like Batman lives in the shadows and you don't know an awful lot about him, but it does make him more of a reactive character rather than a participant in the narrative as such.
But that would work if the film was being told from the perspective of the Gotham City populace, of the people of Gotham City, but it's not told from their perspective. That's not our audience placement into this film.
No.
It's weird because who is? Because I actually think maybe Selena Kyle is supposed to be, because she's the one that starts off from a place of normalcy and then grows into this world of darkness with all of these other characters.
Yeah.
And the film is called Batman Returns.
Yeah.
We're here for Batman.
Yeah, it's just, he's barely in the film. I described his appearance as like some sort of extended cameo. I mean, it's strange in a way. Like, there are certain parallels I get with some of the later Nolan films in that regard. Like, you know, the most notable one being The Dark Knight Rises, which barely features Batman at all.
Yeah.
You do get the sense that they're really struggling at including Batman in this film. And you get the sense that Tim Burton isn't particularly interested in Batman either.
Yes, that's the issue I would say that's at work here.
He's just way more invested in his grotesque villains, much more than anything that Batman's offering. Because even though they did some like redesign work, the Batman sequences, they don't really pop in the way that they did in the original film. They just feel like they're an obligation more than anything else.
Yes. I mean, I will, just to touch upon something about this, I like the audio and visual experience of watching this film, and I think that it's got a fantastic set.
Yeah.
Like, it's got one fantastic set, but I would say that Batman feels like it takes place over a city, whereas Batman Returns feels like it takes place over a square as well. And in that way, the action, when it comes to it, like, there's a good chase scene with Batman's car, but like you say, the action doesn't feel like it pops. It feels more like we're watching a stunt show at times.
Yeah.
Whereas I look at what they did with the 1989 Batman, and yes, technically things may have changed in terms of the visual cohesion or whatever you want to say, but I still feel like that had a grander scope in terms of the city as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very sound-stagey film, this one.
Yeah.
It does remind me an awful lot of Hook.
Yes.
Where it does feel a little bit constrained by its sound-staginess. Like, I'm not sure what the deal was, because obviously we were talking before about the sets at Pinewood where they shot the original film being in storage, and then all of a sudden when they make Batman Returns, they're not filming in Pinewood, they're filming on the Warner Brothers lot.
Yeah.
And I think they used about 50% of all the stages at Warner Brothers to make the film.
Yeah, there's some great interior sets as well.
Oh, yeah.
I want to say, I think these sets are fantastic. They are great sets. I especially love a real understated one is Selena Kyle's apartment.
Yeah.
With that metal beam shooting right through the center of her apartment. This low-hanging metal beam that she's painted pink.
Yeah.
And that says everything about her place in this world, in this horribly oppressive world.
Yeah.
The look of the film is fantastic, but I think because of that soundstaginess, it is constricted in terms of what they can do.
Yeah, because I don't think there are any. Are there any genuinely exterior shots in this film?
Oh.
If there are, they're all night shoots.
Yeah.
You know, in the original Batman, they did actually go out on the backlot in Pinewood and build outdoor sets. So it did feel like you were genuinely in a city, whereas I think they've gone definitely for a more stylized... I mean, not that the original Batman wasn't stylized, but they've gone even heavier into that.
Yeah. it's almost become a bit more fairy tale-esque as well. I mean, it more suits the Penguin as well in terms of that fairy tale element of the film.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's gone more of a dark fantasy route, whereas the first one was a lot more based on, like, I guess, like Metropolis, Fritz Lang, and that type of early German expressionism and that type of thing.
And I think it works in the context of all the villains, but when you get Batman in there, it doesn't work as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get the sense as well. I did a bit of reading about this, and it does feel like there are very mixed messages about Michael Keaton on this film. Like, I get some things where he said this is the film that he prefers, and then I get other things where he's talked about not actually having seen this film in its entirety, and he only did it for the money. In a way, I kind of have to side with the latter because I don't know, I get the feeling like he's a little bit bored in this film. When you compare his performance in the original versus the sequel, even though he's not in the film very much, the appearances that he does make, I don't know, I just get the sense that he's not invested in it as much.
And the thing is that I think that brings us to that as well, is the fact that Batman himself has something of a lesser presence in this film. And I'm not just strictly speaking about screen time as well. But because there's so much going on elsewhere, and in regards to the characters that they introduce, and I'm not asking that, they repeat what they did before, but when we look at Batman, and this is going to sound like that itchy and scratchy and poochy moment, but when we look at Batman, when he's not on screen, people are speaking about Batman, about the danger of doing what they're doing while Batman could be in the darkness at any moment to strike out against them. It's like Batman has a presence in scenes where he's not in. In Batman Returns, he doesn't.
No.
I don't think you get the feeling that Batman is there, or Batman is watching, or Batman is aware, or that people are particularly scared of doing what they're doing in Batman's presence in Batman City.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like that. It feels like a circus of villains in Gotham.
Definitely. And also, like, in addition to that, I don't think the character of Batman or Bruce Wayne has any particular influence over the plot outside. I think the only thing he does is jam the signal to the Penguins at the end.
Yeah.
And obviously he sort of is partly responsible for the Penguins' death at the end with the bats flying out. But even then, it just feels like that's a tacked on thing in a way.
Yeah.
And everything else that happens in the film, absolutely nothing to do with him.
No, it's a very Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark thing where, the series of events would have played out exactly the same with or without him.
Yeah.
That is like the main thing that they've struggled with in terms of, and I think this is where it leads to what we mentioned earlier about the film not having a story, because it doesn't have a story for Batman. And it nearly does. Oh man, this is what we're talking about, because you've got all these characters that are connected in all these kind of weird different ways. And one of the things I was just about to mention is, like, if we take the Penguin out of the subplot with Christopher Walken and make it more about that Batman and Penguin are two souls that are kind of connected by the fact that they've lost their parents, they struggle with their identity as well. And they almost touch upon that very early on as being like Alfred says to Bruce Wayne about, why do you suspect that this grotesque, horrible human is a villain? You have so much in common with him. And I feel like I wrote in my notes, like, why isn't this film about that? Why isn't that the thing that they do with Batman? Because that's the issue about the story, is that there's nothing for Batman to do.
Yeah, and they seem to heavily hint at it. There's like duality in all the main three characters, and they purposely go out of their way to like say that, these are the comparison between the human and the animal, and the fact that all three of these characters are human representations of an animal, and they all have their accompanying real life creatures as well. You've got Batman with his bats, you've got the Penguin with his penguins, and you've got Catwoman with her cats. It's very like overtly obvious, but it doesn't quite make that final push.
Yeah, it's all a bit
make
too
it all
surface.
work. Yeah. And that's why it's incredibly frustrating. And it's incredibly frustrating that they didn't find that avenue for Batman himself to make it work in line with those characters, because I think it is there. I'm not sure whether they... it's one of those things where they would never admit it, but they just ran out of time and everything, because it just feels like this film was... because they had a bit of a delay in getting everyone together, that once they did get everyone together, it was a bit of a rush to the finish.
No, yeah, I think in a way I've mentioned as well, I've wrote down in my notes, and I mentioned to you before we actually began recording, that this is the film in the Batman series that reminds me most of Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
Because there's a particular moment that I want to speak about. And with Return of the Jedi, what I would say is that it's a film that I find to be heavily flawed, and one that the more time that goes by, the more times I watch it, I realize that, there are some things really in this film that don't work. Conversely, it still contains some of my favorite moments of the series, of the Star Wars series.
Yeah.
And this film is that for me with Batman, in that, yes, I do think it's flawed. I think that they don't do enough with Batman. I think that it has too many characters vying for space all at the same time. But at the same time, what they do with Batman and Selina Kyle to lead up to that ballroom scene, I think the moment at the New Year's ball or the Christmas ball where Selina and Bruce Wayne realize that the Batman and Catwoman is probably my favorite comic book moment. And it's not a moment where people are fighting each other. It's not a moment where people, like this grand moment of like epic action. It's just a moment of two people realizing who they are. I don't know. I think that's worth the price of admission alone. And the way that the music drops out and Danny Elfman's score comes in as well. It's a magical moment in this film. I just wanted to mention that as well before we continue.
Yeah. In a way, though, I think it's slightly underplayed because I always get the sense that they kind of know anyway.
Yeah.
And the revelation, it's maybe not quite as strong as it could be, but I like the individual moment. Again, it's like I love the individual moment, but the connections between scenes to scenes doesn't really work. But again, I love the masquerade ball in of itself. And I like the idea that it's a masquerade ball, but they're the only two characters that aren't wearing masks at that particular moment. This is why I think it's a shame that Tim Burton has gone down this kind of either more of the same route or played it incredibly safe. At this point in his career, when he's a very hungry young director, you get the sense that he's really pulling in all of his influences. Like when you've got the massive Phantom of the Opera influence in that scene with the Red Death on the stairs. Yeah. And obviously all the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari stuff and allusions to the Weimar Republic, and even calling one of the main characters Max Schreck from the famous actor from Nosferatu who played Count Orlok. And there's loads of other different references to the Weimar Republic in the film. And there's many, many more of the things that are going on here. Yeah, I just think it's a shame that we've lost that Tim Burton somewhere along the line. And he's kind of just been influenced by himself. He's one of those kind of characters that he's just influenced by his own work rather than anything else outside these days. Like you mentioned earlier, but what we're seeing of Tim Burton now is a Tim Burton making Tim Burton movies. Yeah. It feels like somebody else is trying to do that now. And we said it about Tenet and Christopher Nolan as well. But what did happen? I also think that, I hate to say this because it is something of a cliche, but I do feel like technology as well and how that has changed the visual style of Tim Burton. Things have become, like you say, because I know that this film is soundstagey, but it's a great soundstage. Oh, yeah. It all feels a bit more digital now, even in Tim Burton's filmography. And in terms of the cameras that are used as well, they all have that digital film feel as well. I think that's the jarring thing as well, because so much of his influence is rooted in classic cinema. And like silent era, German expressionism. And old school techniques, that it kind of needs to be executed in that way in order to really work. Yeah. And this is a transitional film because it was one of the last major Hollywood films to be made entirely in this way. There's a little bit of CGI here and there, but mostly it was made using very old school techniques. This is one of the last major films to be released before Jurassic Park, and I think from that point onwards, films definitely started changing in terms of how they were made. Yeah, 100%. I was actually watching a documentary about another film by another comic book filmmaker, Army of Darkness by Sam Raimi, which came out at a very similar time. I think that was 93. Yeah. And they were speaking about with that film as well, about being on these films that came out in this period of time were these like the last vanguards of this old way of filmmaking, and then Jurassic Park came out and changed everything. And we've talked about it as well. Another film that we covered on the show was Tremors. All these films are essentially the last of this breed of films, essentially. And you can see that everything's changed since then. Everything's just grown in another direction entirely. I think one thing as well that I would like to speak about in regards to Batman Returns, and I don't think we've really gone into it in depth, is the actors as well. We've talked about Michelle Pfeiffer being brought on board as well as a last-minute replacement, and I honestly think she is the beating heart of this film. Yeah. Yeah.
She really is. I do feel like she is supposed to be our audience grounding in this world because she is the one that starts from a place of normalcy and becomes wild as a character, is brought into the world that is populated by Batman and the Penguin. But man, Michelle Pfeiffer absolutely just owns the role. She has this like the amazing vulnerability that she has playing Selena Kyle against the kind of the powers she has as Catwoman. But I love that when she is Catwoman, although she's powerful and she's fierce and she hits all of those notes, she's still got that sense of vulnerability about her. There's still something like emotionally raw about her character.
Yeah.
Struggling with her place in the world.
And I would say now, more so than any other Batman villain outside of maybe Heath Ledger playing the Joker, who actually did manage to sort of step out of the shadow of Jack Nicholson's portrayal.
Yeah.
But I still feel like now the way that she played that character of Catwoman and the overall look has now become the definitive portrayal, because even like, you know, when they did that with Anne Hathaway in The Dark Knight Rises, it's so subtle, and what they did that with that character was so completely different that it wasn't really Catwoman.
No.
And less said about the Pit-Off movie.
I want to mention a few things about that film, but yeah, I've written that that performance essentially has overshadowed every Catman performance that has come since. Did I say Catman?
Catman.
Catmandu. Every Catman. Meow.
Oh, dear.
Oh, my gosh. Her performance has overshadowed every Catwoman performance that has come since. Even the Anne Hathaway character, I would say. I like what Anne Hathaway does with The Dark Knight Rises. I like her in that film, but it's not the performance that I walked away from that film thinking, you know, like I did with Heath Ledger with The Dark Knight. It's not the performance I walked away thinking, holy shit, they stole every scene that they were in.
Yeah.
And I think it's because that character's not given that opportunity within that film. I don't think it's anything that Anne Hathaway's done. But like you say, the look of the film, the standing of that character in that world, it's not placed in a point where it can essentially escape the shadow of Michelle Pfeiffer in this film. I think it's because they really positioned Bane for that role in that film as the one that everybody would be talking about when they left the cinema. But yeah, I'm hoping that they do something with the character in The Batman.
Yeah.
But from the trailer, it does look like they're going more that understated route once more. But I'm still hoping that the character embodies something that's like going to grab people and say, this is Catwoman.
Yeah.
You know?
I think it's mainly because the stylistic route they've gone down with a lot of the subsequent films just hasn't allowed for that kind of theatricality that you can get with the Tim Burton style. I think the Tim Burton style allowed to bring that character to its full potential in ways that you wouldn't have been able to before or since. Mm-hmm. So I think that's why it's gone down as being the definitive version of that character on screen, because it wasn't hampered by external stylistic choices, because you do get the feeling that Tim Burton, and I think this goes into how they developed the screenplay, because I know that the Penguin was more of a studio note. It was something that they wanted to have in the film, but I think the Catwoman angle was more of a Tim Burton idea. So you do get the feeling that the whole film is built around her rather than anything else, which is why it works so well.
I like as well with this film, although I do feel like it does have too many. I keep prefacing everything that I say as it has too many characters, but I like the efficiency with which it sets up these characters as well. Yeah. The Penguin's set up in the opening in terms of his origin, and then Catwoman's origins are set up within 15 minutes or something like that. And I like the efficiency of the way in which he hits those marks. All of that feels fine if the story had a greater purpose for these characters. But all of that feels fine. It made me think, wow, this is really at odds with like how they really establish characters now, where it's all about like, you have to have a whole film of this person becoming this character, or at least half a film.
Well, it goes between one or the other, doesn't it? It goes either from being a whole film to being a PDF or a GIF.
Well, to be honest, I'm of the opinion now where we started going the other way, but I would say like more towards the noughties when comic book movies started coming out. It was just origin movie after origin movie after origin movie, and I was so done with it. And I get we're at a point now where all of these characters are so well established that you can just jump in at like year 10, year 15, and everybody gets it. Everybody knows the backstory of this character. Just get into the story. it does seem to have gone the other way now. I mean, look at what they've done with Spider-Man in the MCU, or what they're doing with Batman, where it's more like they've said purposely, this is year 2. We're not doing year 1.
But then you go the other way, like the fucking origins of the Justice League and shit like that, and it's like, fucking hell, like that is the worst way possible to do any kind. I mean, but I think that's when you're dealing with filmmakers and writers of a lower caliber.
Certainly.
I love the beginning of this film. I think for the first 15-20 minutes, it's flawless.
Yes, yeah, I'd agree.
It's only really when you start getting to the Batman stuff and the Penguin starts to reappear and you kind of go, what's this Penguin about?
Yeah,
that you really start to struggle with it, because the opening and the way it sets up Max Schreck and the Square and Selena Kyle, all that works great.
And would you say, and this always does become like one of these big questions for films based around this time of year, is Batman Returns a Christmas movie? Is it one that you return to at Christmas? It gives you those Christmas feelings? Ho, ho, ho.
I don't personally. It definitely is a Christmas movie released at summer. Just like, why didn't they release it in December?
It doesn't make sense.
I think it was before that time, though, wasn't it, when they could do that?
Yeah.
I mean, nowadays they definitely would have done. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it is a Christmas movie because, it starts with a Christmassy theme, and even at the end, Bruce Wayne says, Merry Christmas, Alfred, and stuff.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it definitely has definitely a Christmas framing, which I like. I like the way that they've framed this film. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I don't particularly watch it at Christmas time. Like I said, I haven't watched this film in quite some time.
Yeah.
I genuinely think I loved Batman. Growing up, it was pretty much James Bond, Batman, Star Wars.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. And all my toys, outside of things like trains and stuff, but like in terms of action figures and things, Batman and Star Wars were pretty much neck and neck. I've got a Batmobile, different types of action figures, all that kind of stuff.
I remember the Happy Meal toys for Batman just kept coming round and round and round back again. And I had a immense collection of Batman figurines.
Yeah. And again, we were living in a time where the superhero movie was a rare thing.
Fresh. Yeah,
it was fresh.
New.
It was new. It was exciting. And also, I think because there were individual takes, it was constantly changing as well.
Yeah.
And then I think when you started getting movies like, Batman and Robin, and even like when you start going into the 2000s with Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, which for me is a series I'm not as invested in.
Philistine.
Yeah, but I'm not as invested in that. And my love for superhero things started to wane around that point. And I really like the Nolan films, but I think for other reasons. I think because they were kind of going more into that kind of almost like Heat vibe.
Yes, yeah.
And they were influenced by other films. And I like that. And I think that's, for me, that's what I like about cinematic portrayals of superhero characters when they go down. Mm-hmm. They don't just do a verbatim copy of what's in the comic book. They see it as more of a, right, we're doing this character for the cinema, therefore it's going to be influenced by other things in cinema. Rather than just being we'll just plonk the camera and, you can do your just verbatim portrayal.
I agree with you. I do 100% agree with you on that point. But what I would say is that looking at Spider-Man, for me personally, it's just simply that for me, Spider-Man 2 embodies everything that a pulp comic book movie can be and what a comic book portrayal can be. But my issue with the overall landscape of comic book movies isn't with this idea of them being these kind of pulpy comic book movies. It's just that they're all that. I think there's space for them to be a number of different things if studios allowed them to be. I mean, I'm not a comic book reader. I've never been really a huge comic book reader. I've read plenty over the years, but I've never been like, I'm going to collect these issues of Spider-Man or those issues of Superman or Batman or that type of thing. I've never really been into that side of things. But when I approach these superhero films, it's from a cinematic point of view. I'm looking at them from the position of them being superhero movies. And I like what Spider-Man 2 brings to the table, but that is a Sam Raimi film. It's still got an incredible creative behind the camera. I think so many of these films are populated by people that aren't directors known for their visions, the directors known for getting the job done, essentially. Yeah. So there's this lack of personality that's brought to the table.
Yeah, they've essentially become workmanlike. And I don't know what it is, but like I was saying, going back to like the fact I've not seen this film for a long time, I'm not sure whether it's a combination of that lack of interest in superhero films and also maybe, what's happened to Tim Burton as well. Mm-hmm. It's just made me not go back to these films as much as I used to, because I used to watch these films quite regularly.
And it was a Christmas movie for me, this one.
Yeah.
I remember vividly one Christmas because every kid couldn't go to sleep on Christmas Eve. You were wide awake. And I remember one night I just couldn't sleep and I watched 4 o'clock in the morning, Batman, and then Batman Returns. And then that just became a Christmas thing for me then. So yeah, this film gave me, when I watched it today, it gave me that Christmassy feeling. And I was like, I'd forgotten that it was released at the summer. What an odd time to release this type of film.
It really is. Because I've forgotten it was released in the summer. And I was like, oh yeah, it makes sense for that back then. But then when they started talking about rushing the post-production to get that summer release, and I was like, what? It's so, again, it's like, it is like Die Hard, which is now firmly a Christmas movie, but again was released in the summertime.
We'll have plenty to say about that soon.
Yeah, but it does join that odd club of unintentional Christmas movies that were released in the summer. Yeah, it's just a weird thing that they would not try and tie that in with Christmas. But again, there was no climate for Christmas releases at that time. I think Christmas around that time was firmly rooted in family movies, like, proper like PG family movies.
Yes,
and nothing else. You didn't get big tentpoles. You get films like, I don't know,
Dragonheart, I remember, came out around the Christmas
Home
period,
Alone.
like November. And Home Alone, definitely, 100%.
Things like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, and now they say that Christmas Day is a huge day for cinema. Like, I remember, when Avatar came out in 2009, that was a big day for both Avatar and Sherlock Holmes. And the reason is because apparently it's a tradition amongst certain families in America that you go to the cinema at Christmas.
Yep, it's not here.
I wish that was a tradition here. We haven't talked about Danny DeVito yet.
Danny DeVito is Dorgal.
Oh my god.
And Common is Stonekeeper.
And Zendaya is Michi.
Oh, of course then. Zendaya is Michi, yeah.
Zendaya is Michi.
And Danny DeVito is Penguin.
So we do have to talk about one of the things that they mentioned on the documentary was that he was in character all the time, which I imagine was quite insufferable. And you know what? We haven't even talked about the fact that how prescient this has been, considering that we're recording this just after Joe Biden's been announced as the next president-elect. I guess this is one of those stories that's always going to be relevant when it comes to slimeball politicians.
Yeah.
But holy moly, is this prescient right now at this point in history that this grotesque, weird-handed, weird-haired, eccentric character has been used by billionaires for political purposes to become a leader and then crashed and burned.
Yeah.
But I watched it with my wife and she was just like, oh my God, it's just Trump. It's just Trump. Okay. The way he bit that guy's nose, it's just Trump.
Yeah. Yeah, it is strange though, with that character, considering he opens the film, his origin, it opens the film, and he's meant to be the main villain, but because of the way that they've constructed the story, he gets so lost in the thing.
Yeah.
And I never get the sense of what is driving him.
No.
And what his master plan is. They had the problem of what the Penguin's master plan was. They tried to rectify it, but it is so tacked on and incidental that it may as well not be there, because Batman thwarts it in about 2 seconds anyway.
Yes.
That whole thing with him and his, was it the Red Angle Gang or whatever it's called?
Oh, yeah.
The Red Triangle, that's it.
The Red Triangle, yeah.
Red Triangle.
The Red Angle.
Morning Angle.
Yeah, that's a weird thing. There's a very Twin Peaksy feel to one of those characters. I feel. The one with the poodle reminds me of Log Lady for some reason.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
And what she's doing at the end as well is based on the guy from Diamonds Are Forever.
Oh, is it?
30 seconds on counting. That kind of thing. Yeah,
of course it is.
I'm pretty sure. Again, just too many ideas, because I don't feel like that Red Triangle Gang is developed enough to work fully, and I don't understand the connection between those two. Is kind of there, but it's kind of not.
And you've got, even in and amongst the Red Triangle Gang, you've got Vincent Schiavelli as the organ grinder, and he's not given anything.
It's a real shame with that, because it's got a lot of potential. And this is where I keep thinking, why do they keep doing this? And they keep doing it. They've not fucking learned over this whole 30 years since this film was made that why are you trying to make a film and put like so many different villains in the same film? Because it just doesn't give them any time to develop them properly.
But I give it far more kudos for trying something at this time. But I understand that so many films since have fallen into this trap and not learnt from this mistake. But Batman Returns, I give like a pass for because this is one of the first films that did this. Yeah, exactly. And it was like, we were trying to do too much with these characters and we were trying to be too creative with these characters. And it's like, this was essentially unexplored territory. They were doing something different within the genre.
Yeah.
At that time, comic book movies weren't a thing. So I get where that mistake has come from. It's not come from a point of view of, oh, well, we need to have this character, that character, and that character in the film so we can market all of the toys. I do get that, like, the Penguin's in there because there was a studio push for that character, but they still feel a part of Tim Burton's vision, even if, like, they still feel like they belong in that world, even if they don't have a place within the story. It gets away with it for me, just simply because it's the first of those type of films.
Yeah, but, essentially it is two film ideas smashed together, because I would happily watch a film with the Penguin and the Red Triangle Gang and Batman battling them. And then I would also happily watch a film where it's Selena Kyle, Catwoman, and Max Schreck.
Yes.
And that'll be fine as well on its own.
As much as I love the Masquerade Ball scene, I almost feel like should have been Catwoman's film in a way. I get that it's too early to start talking about spin-offs within the world, but it almost feels like that's the film that everybody was interested in making.
Yeah, definitely.
That's the only element that feels like it has a true story and an arc as well.
Yeah, because I even get the feeling that it's like that with even when you get the conclusion of the film with the Penguin's death and stuff. That just feels like a bit anticlimactic. You get the bit where Batman's in his glider and then he crashes through the zoo.
Yes,
and then the bats are released and he falls back into the pool. And then he's forgotten about for about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Whilst they deal with Catwoman and Max Schreck. And then after all that's gone over with, then they go back to the Penguin and he's kind of alive but dying.
Yeah.
And then he just dies.
Yeah, like that's it. Yeah, he just comes back to die.
Yeah. It's
essentially, it's like, oh, that death was a bit anticlimactic, so we're going to do another anticlimactic death. and hope that 2 anticlimactic deaths make it work.
Yeah.
I also want to mention as well, just talking about the cars or the vehicles that Batman does use, I do like the moment in which his Batmobile turns into a huge black dildo. Honestly, like... I got a bit embarrassed when I was watching it. I was like, "Ooh, pulling at my collar!" Like, "Oh, don't look, Ali. avert your eyes." And one thing that I did want to mention, as we have just gone over this being the film that started the whole multiple villains craze, it also started something else that goes into the Spider-Man films as well, and that is, I've written down, are the early 90s to noughties, when your comic book movies had potential rapes in them. And there is a scene in this film in which 2 men are about to rape a woman before Catwoman turns up to the rescue.
Yeah.
And it does very much remind me of the alleyway scene in Spider-Man.
Oh, yeah.
Where Spider-Man saves Mary Jane from being potentially, possibly raped. Which, to be honest, does this have a place in kids' films?
Well, I think at this stage, they didn't really know where they were going marketing-wise anyway. I mean, I think it's very much a stock-in-trade thing when you're dealing with pulpy movies, that there's going to be 2 guys either robbing a woman or attempting to rape a woman in 80s and 90s films. I mean, you've got RoboCop that takes the piss out of that kind of thing.
Of course, yeah.
But
there's
it's
more
definitely...
hair down there.
Yeah.
But, as the line is. By the way, have you seen that RoboCop remake, Scene 26 or whatever it's called? Where
no.
They remake the... Right. Okay, for anybody that hasn't seen this is something that you 100% need to find online. And there was a remake of RoboCop where loads of different filmmakers were given specific scenes to remake, and they put it together as a giant whole. And one of the scenes was that whole rape scene, the near rape scene before RoboCop turns up and shoots a guy in the dick. Now, in the film, that's where the scene ends. In this remake, it's really where the scene takes off, as more people with more women turn up, and RoboCop just starts shooting everybody in the dick. And then suddenly he turns around and there's like tens of people with the pants down, all like running towards him, all trying to rape a woman. And he just starts shooting every single one of them in the dick. And for a while, it's just a RoboCop theme to very graphic depictions of dicks being shot and exploding. And it is really one of the best things that I've ever seen. Everybody needs to see it. It's called something like RoboCop My Remake or something like that.
Yeah. And yeah, it's obviously something that's been homaged in the last decade, at least, by 21 Jump Street as well. So
Yes, yeah, 100%.
there definitely seems to be something. And I think, in a way, those early 2000s films, they are transitional because they do contain elements that would be built upon in later films, but also elements that are kind of like the end of the road for that kind of format.
Yeah.
And yeah, the Spider-Man stuff and the X-Men films are kind of those transitional films.
Yeah.
And then you get obviously those odd ones out like Daredevil, which are just stuck in another decade entirely. So
I mean, it does beg the question as well when you do approach this film specifically. I would say that the scene doesn't really stick out within the Gotham that Burton presents. It more so sticks out as a part, like as a weird genre trope of the time.
Yeah.
But I feel like Burton's film is less. I mean, I say less geared towards children. I mean, it was 100% geared towards children in terms of marketing toys and that type of thing.
Yeah.
But it also, like over here, it was a 15 anyway.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
I mean, I know it was on the cusp of when we started to crack down on having toys from 15 films and above being marketed toward little kids, but it was still just good enough to get the toys in the Happy Meals.
Yeah.
But I would say because of its more adult themes anyway, it got away with those type of scenes, whereas in Spider-Man, it really sticks out. I know that on the face of it, they would always say, oh, it's just a robbery. But we know what the connotations are of that scene, what's implied by their actions. You know, when we see 4 male robbers attack a woman in an alley, we know they're not really after her purse. Spider-Man is really the end of that. That's when those scenes started to go away. But in the 90s and noughties, they seem to be full of these type of scenes.
Yeah, and following on from that, I mean, we can extend that into the character of the Penguin and him being some sort of like sex pest.
That's what I meant by more adult themes.
There's many inappropriate lines in this film.
He's truly a sleazeball.
Oh, really is.
He's really sleazy. I do remember at one point there is some sort of fish-related pun.
Oh, yeah, I've got it here, yeah. It's the French flipper trick.
Oh, that's it, yes.
Yeah, it's when he's running for mayor, and it's like, have a button. There are some things in there that I'm like, even in a PG-13 film, which this was in the States, that are very, very borderline.
I'm glad he didn't say something like, thumb in the pink, dorsal fin in the stink.
Oh, man. Oh, that's the other thing as well. Christopher Walken definitely says unlimited poontang in the film.
How
Yeah.
have I not? That's it. That exactly sounds like the type of line that would speak to me, and I've not picked up on it once.
Yeah, it's around the same place. It's in that mare scene where he bites the guy in the nose. I'd never really heard it before.
I've always thought they just said unlimited power. And
No.
I've not really-
No. I actually wrote after this. It's in full-on Walken mode. So it's the way that he says it. He kind of almost like cheekily slips it in there, but it's almost like a blink and you'll miss it reference. But he genuinely says unlimited poontang.
Oh, mate, that says everything about this film.
Yeah.
It does beg the question, is this a film for kids?
No, absolutely not. And I don't think Tim Burton intended it to be. Like, you can generally tell that there's a really uneasy relationship between him and the studio. And I don't know why the studio did what they did, because they basically, to try and get him back to do the sequel, said, you can do whatever you want. And then when he does whatever he wants, they cry foul. And then obviously it becomes a situation afterwards where they don't actually want him to make another Batman movie. So it's like, what happened? Was there some sort of change in the top people? I don't know whether there was some kind of transition going on somewhere, because it feels very odd that they would ask him to do a Tim Burton film. He delivers a Tim Burton film, and then they don't like it.
Yeah, and it's not like Batman was particularly different in terms of its approach as well, because that over here was a 15 as well.
Yeah.
And I think that, the majority of that is due to, once more, Batman's cold-bloodedness and Jack Nicholson's portrayal of the Joker. But even so, I still think, for some reason, looking at the world presented in Batman and going from that film to this film, I do feel like there is a sort of Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom relationship between the two films.
Oh, yeah, definitely, yeah. Even down to its, like the Temple of Doom has a very soundstagey feel as well. That's very like claustrophobic, very much like this film is. They do actually have quite a lot in common with each other. You could argue that Batman Forever is the last crusade, but not really.
Yeah. I mean, I would say as well, much like Temple of Doom, Batman Returns certainly has its fan base as well.
Yeah.
It certainly has a very strong fan base, considering that it is a film that came out at the time. And we'll go into this later with the stats and facts, but it's a film that came out at the time and didn't perform as well as the original. It wasn't the type of film that people thought it was going to be.
Yeah, that's, I think also as well, that is also a film that I really like. I mean, there's a couple of things that I could do without, but that is also a film that has a very static plot.
Mm-hmm.
It revolves around that temple so much in the way that this film revolves around its square.
Yes.
That the narrative doesn't really propel as so much as it's like an extended runaround. You've got this situation and everything revolves around this. And then things get resolved at the end, but then in the middle, it's like you're stuck in this situation.
Yeah.
It's a very different to like either Batman or Raiders of the Lost Ark, where it's definitely a much more flowing narrative going from one thing to the other. Yeah, they are very static in that way.
The films that bookend Temple of Doom, they feel more of an adventure because there's that sense of globe-trotting. There's that sense that Indiana Jones is traveling through a story. Whereas in this one, it feels like he's stuck, rooted in a story kind of thing. You can't break free of it.
Yeah, definitely.
And I would say that this film certainly has that feeling as well, where everybody feels rooted to this very small space within Gotham City. They do make good use of it, and it is a great set.
Yeah, but I think with Returns, they really upped the ante in making Gotham City feel closed in and oppressive. They really double down on that in this film. In the films either side, Gotham is incredibly stylized. And, the same goes into how they depict Gotham in Forever as well. But this one especially is doubling down on that kind of fascist imagery.
Yes, yeah. And one thing that we haven't actually spoke about so far is the music.
Yeah.
And that is a point that we really should make, because the music is very much, like Steven Spielberg said in regards to Jaws, that the soundtrack from John Williams is 50% of why that film works. I think these Batman films, the music is 50% of why these films work as well. And they become so iconic for this character that, I mean, do you remember when Batman Begins came out? And even with Hans Zimmer, like a safe pair of hands like Hans Zimmer, nobody thought that he would be able to escape that shadow. And he did something completely different, which was the way forward to go, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But oh my God, this is still the theme for Batman in my mind?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I don't think Hans Zimmer completely got out of its shadow until The Dark Knight anyway. Like, I don't... The Batman Begins score is good, but it's not as good as the Dark Knight score.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the style of that really came into its own. Whereas I feel like Batman Begins, it still sort of lives in the shadow of the initial Batman film series. And the same thing goes so when you talk about Spielberg and John Williams, they go hand in hand, and the same thing goes for Tim Burton and Danny Elfman. So they are intrinsically linked to one another.
Absolutely. And when I think of a Tim Burton film and the aesthetics of a Tim Burton film, I already have a sound in my mind as well.
Yeah.
I know what that score is. And it's weird, I would say as well, that in the years since that, Tim Burton's visual style has waned and its film quality has also suffered. So has Danny Elfman's scores as well.
Yeah, I think that is the case when you've got an identity that is so well defined from the start, but then there's not very much leeway.
Yeah.
You know what a Tim Burton film has this aesthetic, but there's very little leeway outside of that aesthetic. And the same goes for Danny Elfman, that once you've done it a few times, it does start to become very stale.
Yeah.
And I get the same thing, like, even with Danny Elfman's Spider-Man scores, I kind of feel like they are a little bit, I mean, they're fine, but I do feel like they are workmanlike interpretations of the kind of stuff that he'd already done with Batman.
There is a story behind Danny Elfman's work on the Spider-Man films and relationship between Danny Elfman and Sam Raimi. And it is one that we've heard many times and spoke about many times on this podcast, and that is one of a director falling in love with the temp track material.
Yeah.
And especially with Spider-Man 2 was when that relationship started to unravel, because there are some themes, especially in relation to Doc Ock, in which they just simply bought the rights to Christopher Young's score to Hellraiser. And they used that as the theme for Doc Ock. And Danny Elfman really struggled with that to the point that they had a massive falling out.
Yeah.
And he didn't come back around to working with them. Was it Oz the Great and Powerful?
Yeah, he didn't do 3, did he?
He brought in Christopher Young instead to do 3. and that does have some nice themes as well, but it feels like it's lacking something as well. But yeah, I would say that Danny Elfman's scores for Spider-Man 2, they have a couple of good themes, but yes, they do seem to be just hitting familiar beats. I think the temp track material really does fall into that.
Yeah, and I think, Danny Elfman is kind of a victim of his own success, because it's fine sometimes when he's doing the Danny Elfman thing, but whenever he tries to do something else, like when, I remember when we talked about Terminator Salvation, it's a little bit directionless.
I mean, even like scores in which he's brought on last minute, which are pure workman, like Hulk, for example, in which it was the reversal of what we've just spoken about, in which Danny Elfman was a last minute replacement for a composer and had to write this score and have it finished within a very short, 6-week window. And I still think he managed to pull something out of the bag, out of nothing there, managed to salvage something. But I would say he does fall into the trap of just, like you say, being a bit workmanlike in terms of his later scores.
But yeah, this is classic Elfman, though.
Oh yeah, for all that we're saying, this is one of my favourite Elfman scores ever.
And that's the thing as well, it is a kind of a bit of a shame that the Hans Zimmer Batman music for a lot of younger audiences has become the de facto, because I kind of feel like when this is firing on all cylinders, I'd say it's kind of vastly superior. You can't really beat the opening titles of either this film or Batman. Yeah. There's something about those two opening titles that are just they are sort of ultimate superhero. Yeah. They're the kind of title sequences that Marvel wish they had.
Yes.
They're generally rather awful at doing title sequences. So, I mean, some of them don't bother at all. So
that is very true.
Obviously, the Nolan films didn't do any. They had the little insignia at the start, didn't they? And then they just, and they have some sort of noise or something like that.
Yeah.
I think they were kind of smart in a way that they didn't try and compete with what they'd done in the earlier films.
But in a way, it did lead to, because we speak about Batman Returns. This isn't the last time that Danny Elfman composed for the Caped Crusader.
No.
As we do know, he was brought in as a last-minute replacement for Junkie XL on the Justice League movie. Yeah. And I think this says everything in terms of what the modern audience's demand is for film music. But there was a lot of controversy about Danny Elfman coming in and repeating the more classical scores, like the John Williams theme for Superman and his original Batman theme for Batman. There was actually a controversy about that people were saying that's not the Batman theme and that's not the Superman theme. And that is why Junkie XL has been brought in for the Snyder Cut, to bring those themes established in the DC universe back around again.
Yeah.
And I think that says everything about where we are with maybe modern audiences is too much to say, but maybe just Snyderverse fans.
The 3 Snyderverse fans.
Yeah. I don't think that is a good score, by the way. I don't think that's Danny Elfman's best score or anything like that, or indicative of what a good Danny Elfman score is. But that little controversy there, it kind of summed something up for me that I'd been feeling about modern films anyway, about what the audience expectation was that a score did and what's being left behind as well.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, modern superhero films, I'll just leave them to it now. I've kind of given up.
Yeah.
I mean, there'll be the odd one that I'll watch, but they're so fucking formulaic, and I just have very little interest in them. I mean, sorry for all those listeners who may be fervent fans of those, but I don't give a fuck anymore about those kind of films. They really just bore me. I've
got no issue with people that enjoy these type of films, and I certainly still do watch them. I certainly, because I'll watch any old shit. I don't look forward to them. It's just something in the schedule.
Yeah, they're just there, aren't they? Really, there's it's like wallpaper.
But I would always say that the thing that Marvel, it is like wallpaper. I would say that the thing like about Marvel specifically as well, in terms of the modern universe, is that I think they've always grappled with the fact that their films don't have very good scores. There are some good themes, but there are not good scores.
No.
That's not to say that's by and large for everything, but I think they've always grappled with that. I know there's the big Avengers theme. Da, 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 da. I know that one. I know that's one everybody always puts forward as saying, what about this? Isn't this iconic? Yes, it is. Okay, that one is, but this is like 20 films or something like that?
Yeah.
And you've got one theme. Brilliant. Well done. You know? I do struggle with that series on a soundtrack basis as well. I think it lost me some time ago. I stopped listening to them as well, even for the films that I liked.
I mean, it's not even that. There's a real lack of... it does crop up a little bit. I mean, obviously, most obviously in the James Gunn Guardians films and things like that. But there's very little of individualistic craft on display.
Yeah.
Especially when you pinpoint it directly to a film like this, like Batman Returns. Just thinking about the scene where the Penguin visits his parents' grave and how they handle the lighting on that and how stylized the lighting is. Like there's it's almost like theatrical in how they have like a spotlight on the grave and everything.
Yeah.
Like you just would not get anything like that in any kind of modern superhero film.
Well, you've just touched upon something that I've actually written in my notes about this film in general, and that is that it has the feeling of a theatre production. I know that we've said it's got that soundstage feeling as well, but also in the lighting as well. Like it has a classical feeling as well. I know that it's in the way that these Tim Burton films are more monochromatic as well in terms of the way in which the colour is presented. But when you see this film, despite all of its flaws, you're seeing an identity on display. And one more thing I just wanted to mention in regards to the score, just in terms of iconic it became. It's not just the themes for this film and Batman, but also Batman the Animated Series.
Yeah.
That was Saturday morning, that theme would be on TV. And I don't think there was a kid of our generation that wasn't pumped just listening to that.
And although they're not exactly the same, they are very much like stylistically linked to one another, the animated series. It's just a shame that everything has to be so sort of homogenized. And they've got to a point where like the audience demand it as well. They don't like when things change, and it's very odd. We're
in that place where everything lives or dies based on the social media reaction to the film.
Yeah.
And we spoke about it in relation to... I mean, I know that we agreed that it is a film that does have its flaws, but like going back to something like The Last Jedi, which takes a hell of a lot of risks, and it's essentially eviscerated by a certain community for that. We've got people asking at once and the same time for something different and something the same. And how on earth do you cater to those audiences? And when everything is so binary as well in terms of it's either the best thing ever or the worst thing ever, there's no space for individual craft. There's no space for vision in that way. Everything just kind of has to fit neatly in a package. And I know that David Finch has been talking about that recently. Martin Scorsese's been talking about it recently. And the more that the days go by, the more I subscribe to that way of thinking, unfortunately, as well. But I will say as well, one day, Andy, the next season, you are watching a Marvel film.
Oh, no.
We're going to get on that Avengers bandwagon, and we are going to see what all the hype is about.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think it's time for us to move on to the stats and facts in this very lengthy episode. And to begin, let's look at the box office figures for this film. So I do have the box office figures for both Batman Returns and Batman, just so that we can compare and contrast to a contemporary film from the time within the same series. So I'm actually going to begin with Batman, just so that we have something to relate to. And that film had a budget of $35 million. Just to put that against Batman Returns, Batman Returns more than doubled that budget. It was $80 million.
I think that was down to some of the salaries, though, as well.
Yes, 100%. And Batman opened to a $40 million opening weekend to $251 million domestically overall, and worldwide $411 million. And that was 1989, I do believe.
Yeah, that's probably at least $1 billion
in today's figures, at least. It was a massive, massive film.
Absolutely. And when you look at Batman Returns, it's an $80 million budget. I don't think they would have been expecting to make, even though it's double the budget, I don't think they were going to be expecting to make double the box office. But I certainly don't think that they were going to be thinking that they were making less than that film, and that's exactly what they did. So, although it opened to a better initial opening of $45 million for that first weekend, it only made $162 million in the US overall, which is down, like $91 million from the previous film, and overall $266 million. Which, again, that's like, in terms of the difference, 150 something, even more so than that. But yes, it's quite a significant decrease.
Yeah.
And just to give you an idea as well of the films that Batman Returns was up against, I'm going to go through the top 10 of these films. Batman Returns did open at number 1, which is expected of the series. Number 2 was Sister Act. Number 3 was Patriot Games. Number 4 was House Sitter. Number 5 was Lethal Weapon 3. Number 6 was Far and Away. Number 7 was Encino Man. Isn't that one with the Californian Neanderthal that gets thawed out and becomes like a surfer or a skateboarder or something like that?
Maybe.
I don't know. It's some nonsense. Number 8 was Alien 3. Maybe soon to be featured on this show. You'll have to wait till the next season to find out. Number 9 was Class Act. And number 10 was a film starring everyone's favourite beaver, Basic Instinct.
I mean, that's there's quite a few big films in that list, actually. There's some stiff competition there, I think.
So moving over to the reviews as well. I've been onto Rotten Tomatoes and I can say that this does have a quite solidly high percentage rate of 80%. But the average rating is slightly lower, which is 6.68 out of 10 for the average rating. And the consensus is that director Tim Burton's dark, brooding atmosphere, Michael Keaton's work as a tormented hero, and the flawless casting of Danny DeVito as the Penguin and Christopher Walken as, well, Christopher Walken, make the sequel better than the first. That's the consensus. They make the statement that this sequel is better than the first. I think in some ways it is. I'm not too sure on the overall.
Yeah, I think as a whole it's not quite as satisfying an experience, but I think on some of the aesthetics and everything, it's definitely building on that first film.
And moving on to the critic review, once more I've dipped into the Empire magazine well, and I've pulled up a review from Philip Thomas. And he said, despite some torturous one-liners, the shock here is the remarkable lack of any humour, as if Burton and screenwriter Daniel Waters are somehow taking the whole thing too seriously. A surprise since Burton has proved himself a highly competent director of comedy. He does, however, once again prove himself as a filmmaker of rare vision here, with the atmosphere of a city on the brink, expertly created by a man who knows exactly what he wants to say. That so many people seem prepared to listen is a testament not to Warner's vast marketing machine, but to Tim Burton's uniquely twisted vision. And Philip Thomas gave it 4 out of 5 for Empire. It's a solid review. However, as firmly solid as the Rotten Tomatoes score is at 80%, the audience score is lower than this at 73% with a 3.74 out of 5 average rating. Yeah, so again, I think we're seeing a significant drop in terms of the audience appreciation of this film from the first to the second. And yes, just to clarify as well, the IMDb score for this film is a solid 7 out of 10. So how do you find those stats and facts, Andy? Where are your feelings towards them?
Yeah, and I think that's just the end of the day. They did not make a... this isn't a summer movie.
No.
This is a winter movie. I mean... obviously not just in aesthetics, but I just think the whole feeling of it doesn't have a summer vibe. It wouldn't have gone down well as a summer movie, I don't think.
Yeah.
Especially in America, obviously. And I think just the overall aesthetics of it, because it is full on Burton, and because you've got the extra added darkness of the Batman thing as well, I just don't think it would have gone down so well in an American summer audience anyway.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't have done. Because it's just not what they would have wanted. It's not the kind of thing they would have wanted to see at that particular time of year.
No, yeah, I agree with you. And just as well, to give my final thoughts on this film, I do want to stress that I do think this is a very good film. This is a very good film with some aspects of which do stand out as masterpiece level within the genre as well. And some of these elements are the peak of the comic book genre for me. But that said, as mentioned earlier on, I do think it's lesser the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
And there are other things at play. I think there are studio ropes being pulled as well, and things happening behind the scene that have just prevented this from becoming the reference film that it could have been for this genre. So I still have very much to appreciate about it. I can still see why it still has a very solid and vocal fan base as well. And yeah, I still like it a lot. It'll still be a fixture in my house, and that theme as well will always be the Batman theme for me. I do love Hans Zimmer's work and James Newton Howard's work on Christopher Nolan's films. They're completely different, and that was the right thing to do. But in terms of presenting an iconic theme, this is the one that does it for me.
Yeah. I think the other thing as well, I don't think we mentioned it, is that this film had a very short post-production period as well, because it was a little bit rush released for the summer.
It's crazy. We keep talking about the summer.
And I'm wondering whether that's had some impact in terms of how the stories come out, in terms of how it's been presented.
Yeah.
Because they probably didn't have as much time as they wanted to balance all the elements out. But it will always be a very interesting film, and it's definitely one to go back to, even just for the technical thing. I mean, it's a strange thing. It's like everything is there. You've got the performances are great, the design, the music, the way everything's been filmed. It's just missing that last element of that brings it all together. Which is a flowing narrative.
Yes, yeah.
And that's really the only thing that it's missing. And some would argue maybe that it doesn't need that, but I think as a follow-up to Batman, I'm definitely thinking that's the thing that's really missing. Because Batman had a very strong through line, which this film doesn't have.
And a controversial through line as well, but it still had one that ran through the film.
Yeah.
Which is the whole Batman confronting the source of all his fear and doubt in the world, which is the Joker, the person that killed his parents in this universe. And you know what? I will say this as well, just as an aside before we wrap up. I never had an issue with that.
No.
I never had an issue with the Joker being the person that killed Batman's parents. It's fine.
No, I actually, because, I mean, growing up, I didn't really know any different anyway, but I always liked the
Dance with the Devil in the Pale Blue Night.
So good, that bit. And they managed to find an actor who looked like young Jack Nicholson. It's bizarre.
It really does.
Yeah. They don't retcon that in Forever, do they? I always get mixed up.
It's been a long time since I've seen Forever.
I think
it's another one that we could probably cover on the show.
They don't repeat that scene in Returns, but because they repeated the parents' murder scene in Forever, I get very confused.
It becomes incredibly repetitious.
Yeah. I would say the initial Batman film series is probably one of the most confused out of all of the... Because I don't even think you can even compare it to the X-Men, because they still had some sort of stylistic similarity, even though the quality went up and down. The Batman has no continuity at all, between the two halves. The fact that legitimately Batman and Batman and Robin are in the same series and they share several cast members. You still got Pat Hingle as Commissioner Gordon and Michael Goff as Alfred. What? It's just bizarre.
And Schumacher's films do feel like they are based in some neon lit gay club.
Yeah.
Version of Gotham City.
They really are.
I love the camp aesthetic of those two films. Yeah. I think it's safe to say that we will be covering one of those films in the next season of the show. That's something to look forward to, certainly. Okay, so I think that's all we've got time for on this very lengthy Christmas episode of the show. And if you join us next week on Popcorn Digest, we'll be asking, how can the same thing happen to the same guy twice? Rennie Harlan, that's why. Yes, that's it. We are going to be reviewing Die Hard 2, Die Harder. I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be a good one. We can all bask in the sight of William Sadler's ball.
You know what I'd like to see with the Die Hards is that middle Christmas in between Die Hard 1 and Die Hard 2 where nothing happens. Because is it like Die Hard 1 is
McLean household?
Yeah, because Die Hard 1 1988 Christmas And then Die Hard 2's 1990 Christmas. What happened in that Christmas of 1989?
that forgotten Christmas.
Yeah.
Oh, don't say that, because Disney will come up with some middle film TV series or
Bruce,
something.
if you're listening to this, this is that Die Hard 6 you've been waiting for. What happened in that 1989?
I can imagine it. They could do it like one of those terrible Hallmark Christmas movies,
Yeah.
where like nothing really happens. It's just Christmas in a household.
Yeah.
So it's like every day, Bruce Willis gets up and he's in his vest and he's like, "Is this it? Is this going to happen?" He could do it like all the time. Terrorists, like it's on the cusp of something happening all
But
the
nothing
time.
happens.
But it just
He
misses
manages
him. Yeah,
to avoid it. A plane crashes into the next door's house, but just misses.
Yeah, and he's like, "Whoa, glad I wasn't there.
Yeah.
I was in the right place at the right time."
Yeah.
Okay, well, we hope to see you then. Until then, it's bye from me, Gareth. I don't know why I said my name. Until then, it's bye from me.
And it's bye from me, Andrew.
Thank you for listening.
Release the Batcock.